The crypto market has been on a proper roller coaster this year, and to be honest, it's just left investors exhausted. A lot of promise went into this year, and it just hasn't materialized in the way that we thought it might. So what lessons can we take from this year? Full disclosure, this is just my personal view, and I have sold everything. I no longer hold any crypto. I'll expand on my reasons as we go. If you're watching this in January after Bitcoin's hit a new all-time high, thinking, what an idiot, then fair enough, I'll take it. One of the biggest surprises to most people this year is that there's been no alt season. Historically, in previous cycles, when Bitcoin's hitting new all-time highs and going on a rally, that money then flows into some of the altcoins and it flows down the market cap. And those altcoins have tended to perform better than Bitcoin in that cycle. But that just hasn't happened this year. Since Bitcoin's previous cycle top in 2021, where it hit just under 69k, it performed 83% from that level to hit a new all-time high this year of around 126k. When you compare that to other cryptos, for example, Ethereum just about broke a new all-time high, but it basically matched its cycle top in 2021. Solana did get a new all-time high, but it was done in January of this year, and it hasn't got anywhere near that since. And just look how far away the likes of Cardano and Litecoin are. Of course, anything can happen in this market. We may still get an alt season. It could happen in Q1 of 2026. But if it doesn't happen, in hindsight, it does seem quite normal that this would be the case. After all of these cryptos do have different use cases. But to be honest, I don't think anyone cares about any of the use cases. They just use it as a narrative to buy the token. All they care about is making money. If they see potential because it's got a lot of popularity, or it's got good marketing behind it, that's the reason they're buying it. They're not buying it because it's got some use case on the blockchain. Most people don't even understand that. And that's why Bitcoin is still king, because I think people do understand its use case and its long-term potential. And because it's the biggest and the oldest, it tends to get the most attention, especially from traditional finance. 2021 was almost a perfect setup for crypto. In the previous cycle in 2017, Bitcoin hit a high of just under 20,000. And people either missed out on that rally or they got in too late and then were massively burnt in 2018, where it fell 83%. So not only were people waiting for the next cycle and the next opportunity to get in 2020, we then had the pandemic and lockdowns, where people couldn't go to work and they couldn't leave the house, and governments were stimulating economies by printing money, giving people checks. Some people didn't need that money, so a lot of that money just went into investments. And a lot of that went into Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. At the same time, the pandemic also brought about a massive increase in content creators. People either couldn't work or they just had more time. So people started making videos about all sorts of things. And the crypto market was perfect for that influencer that wanted to make some quick money. We saw massive pump and dump scams where people were paid to shill certain tokens, only to then rug pull on their audience. And they weren't even making their money from the crypto market. They were making their money from either selling their own token, or they were making money from people clicking on affiliate links, opening an account with a certain exchange. And then they were portraying this ultra luxury and lavish lifestyle. Then they encouraged more and more people to get into the crypto market. Most of the predictions were wrong. Everyone was saying Bitcoin was going to hit at least over 100k. It topped out at 69. And even then, when it started to dip from there, they were saying it was still going to then go on another rally into the next year. And a lot of people then would buy in and they wouldn't see a return or break even to another 4 years. Most people wouldn't even hold that long. They would have ended up just selling at a loss. And this year, there's been even more crypto influencers making even more extreme predictions. This year, Bitcoin's going to hit $1 million. Ethereum's going to hit $20,000. Solana to $1,000. And they're trying to get people to regularly trade. They want people to use these exchanges, watch their content, and that's how they earn their money. Through people watching their content, ad revenue, affiliate links, etc. We know from traditional markets that most retail traders lose money in the long run. But if we took a step back to try and advise what to do with Bitcoin, it'd be really simple. If we have a long time horizon, at least 10 years, buy in regularly, direct debit, monthly, however you want to do it, and just forget about it. Don't look at it for a long period of time. The same way that you might look at your stocks investments or a gold investment. But of course, with content creation, that doesn't work. We need to be creating videos every week or even every day because we want to get people watching. So you can't just have that narrative. And that's why we get into wanting people to trade, try and make more money, use leverage, and obviously just increases the risk. I really do think that's mainly the end of it now. There will still be some about, but I think people can just see through it. They're not stupid. And even this year, we've seen more predictions just turn out to be wrong. It's funny seeing the goalposts being constantly moved. At first, the peak was going to be September. Then it was going to be pushed back a couple of weeks. And sitting right now, it peaked at the beginning of October. But then that wasn't going to be the end of the peak because they said we were going to have a bit of a dip and then we were going to get another rally in November. That didn't happen. Then it's going to happen before the end of the year. Now that's looking not likely. Oh, now it's going to be Q1 next year. Oh, because of the Fed not reducing interest rates quick enough, now the 4-year cycle's out of the window and now it's going to be Q4 of 2026. And every time the prediction is wrong, they'll just come up with a new goalpost and a new narrative of why that didn't happen, all the while people are losing money taking this advice. One of the biggest benefits for Bitcoin is being decentralized, i.e. a government or central bank can't control its supply like it can with fiat currency, and holders can hold it offline, i.e. you can download your token and your key, and you can hold that on essentially a USB stick. That means it's not on any exchange or any platform. You have custody of that. And then ETFs came along and changed the game, but not in the way that we thought they might. I think a lot of people thought that when ETFs were introduced, it would be for more traditional investors that didn't want to get into the technology of having to download physical keys and have custody of those assets. But it turns out what investors actually prefer is peace of mind and ease of investing, being able to see those assets alongside some of their other traditional investments, the ability to buy and sell very quickly, and not having to use the unregulated exchanges. But the popularity of these ETFs has meant assets like Bitcoin is so integrated into traditional finance now. I think there was also a feeling that ETFs were going to have a massive positive boost on cryptocurrencies. And it did to a certain extent. But what it also did is allow people an easy way to also sell. So when Bitcoin started to dip, for example, it was then very easy for people to sell the ETF because they had immediate access to it. Where if you held that crypto offline on a USB stick, because there's more barriers before you sell it, you might be less likely to panic sell, for example. That's just a theory of mine that people aren't really looking to hold this long term yet. People are still using Bitcoin to trade. They want to make money quickly. Yes, they can see the long-term potential, but they don't want to wait 10 years before it hits that $1 million. They want to make their money now, and hence it's being used to trade with rather than just being held as a long-term asset. And that leads us on to the next point. This year has to be one of the most manipulated markets in crypto, and a lot of that comes down to Donald Trump being US president. For a man that once hated Bitcoin and said it was a scam, now saw an opportunity to make money from it, whether that was introducing his own crypto token along with his wife, that turned out to just be a pump and dump that had absolutely no value, whether it was policy announcements or tweeting or whatever he does, that then caused a massive rally, only for them to crash a few days later. People are watching his speeches, analyzing every word that he says, and it's so easy for him to manipulate the market because of the power and the reach that he has. But what it shows is that the crypto market just isn't mature or big enough yet to still not be manipulated. Because the market cap and the liquidity of some of these tokens are just not that big, the market can be moved just by one big player. If you're an investor in the stock market, you'll likely have a time horizon of at least 5 years. But imagine if you were making decisions on a daily basis, basing your decisions off what the president was saying or what the media or articles were saying on a daily basis. It would just be extreme and insane. And this comes back to the point that people are not seeing Bitcoin and the rest of the crypto markets as a long-term play. They're just using that as a narrative. They're using Bitcoin to trade with because they want to make money quickly. They're not holding it for 4+ years for the next cycle. They want money now, they want to trade. And that's why it's so volatile and it's so easily manipulated. I wrote an email on this recently, and it also aligns with everyone predicting an AI bubble. And the thing with these kind of predictions is the what is actually the easy part, it's the when that's the hard part. In Bitcoin, for example, everyone was predicting that it was going to hit over 100K. Everyone said that was going to happen in 2021. They were right about the what, but completely wrong with the when. It didn't hit that until 3 years later. And the same could happen in traditional markets. There could be an AI bubble. Is that going to be the beginning of next year? Is it going to be in the next 2 or 3 years? We don't know. And the people making these predictions, at some point they might be right, but they could get the when completely wrong. At the end of 2022, 23 and 24, everyone was predicting the following year to be a negative year in the stock market, only for the S&P and the wider market to go on to do double digits. And a rule I tend to abide by is that when everyone's predicting the same thing, it usually never happens in the way that we think it might. On selling and why I did it, first, I have to admit that I was wrong. Like many others, I didn't think 126K was going to be the top. I wasn't making crazy predictions like over 250K or $1 million. I thought it might get to 140 or 150. But there comes a point as an investor where you have to take a step back and realize when you're wrong and realize when you need to change paths. If you're a really long-term investor, then these dips shouldn't really concern you because you're not thinking about this year or next year. You're thinking 5-10 years in the future. And we can be fairly confident that Bitcoin is going to be a lot higher then than what it is now. You wouldn't have invested into it if you didn't think it was. But my point about why I sold, and I did this about a month ago, is I always ask myself, is this the last time that we see this price? If you think this is the last time that we see this price, for example, today it's sitting at about 87K. If you believe that's the last price and this is the low, then of course you wouldn't sell. But if you feel like it's going to go lower, and over the next 2 or 3 years, for me, I feel like it's going to dip further and there's going to be a better opportunity to buy in later. And that's why I thought it was better off selling putting money into other investments, and then maybe come the end of 2026, start to buy back into Bitcoin again. And although a lot of people are saying the 4-year cycle is no longer a thing, but until that happens, we have to base it on what we can see in the market right now. And right now, the 4-year cycle is still intact. And the Bitcoin low tends to be, in previous cycles, about a year after its cycle top. So if we're saying that October 2025 was Bitcoin's cycle top, well, then it would make sense to get back in about a year later, obviously towards the end of 2026. I also look at how much Bitcoin fell in previous cycles. Following the high in 2017, in 2018, Bitcoin fell 84%. After the high in 2021, in 2022, Bitcoin fell 77%. And just like you would expect diminishing returns on the upside, you can also expect diminishing losses on the downside. And so we've gone from 84% to 77%. Just throwing wild figures out there hypothetically, if it was to fall 68%, that would bring us back down to about 40,000. Of course, that might not happen, and the low might be a lot higher than that. And then I may have missed that opportunity. But I think a lot of people think that it's always the last opportunity to get in, because it's likely not. There will be big dips in the future. And remember, this is an asset just like gold that doesn't produce a yield. So if you're holding this long term, if the price doesn't move, you're actually losing money in real terms. So you've got to think of the opportunity cost as well. So I do think there's a lot we can take from this year. It has been very frustrating. And I do think investors are simply just exhausted. The amount of media hype, the amount of promise, the amount of hope that went into this cycle just hasn't really materialized. In Bitcoin, less so, because it has hit a reasonable all-time high, even though people thought it would go a lot higher. But more so in markets like Ethereum and Solana, which just haven't performed how people thought. And many people have sold at a loss. But that's just the game that we play, and we have to learn from that. This is just my take. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, just like anyone else. And if they do tell you they know what's going to happen, they're lying to you and they just want your money. I hope you found that useful. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. I'll catch you in the next one.